Hi, my name is Valerie Eaton, and I'm the president of the Peekskill NAACP. Up next, what you'll hear is an answer from our CD17 candidates. Several of them were able to answer our invitation. We will have our co-chair, Jay Buckiewicz, ask a very important question as it relates to environmental justice.
If you were in Congress, would you vote for the new Green Deal? In the upcoming year, Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant will be decommissioned. What efforts would you put forth to ensure that the federal government would assist New York State and Westchester County in monitoring the decommissioned plant?
Yes, I would definitely vote for a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is not only an initiative that helps us with Go Green initiatives, and that can definitely be very beneficial for us in the local area, but it also helps with, federal guaranteed jobs, which we need nationwide. So I definitely support it. There's been some criticism that it's too ambitious, but you know what? Our environment is now like on fire now, and we need an aggressive legislation that addresses a significant number of economic challenges that are going on in our environment. Environmental challenges. So I definitely support the Green New Deal. Oh, excellent question. I would tell you, this is personal to me, is making sure that the Indian Point is shut down. I used to be in the National Guard, and we've had many of our soldiers, and including me at one point, serve on, provide security and patrol and at Indian Point. And I will tell you, based on the crisis management assessments that we've conducted there, it is very dangerous as far as the opening or having Indian Point located in the area right now. So ensuring that we shut it down, I would make sure not only that I would push forth that the state and local areas shut it down, but I will have agencies like Department of Defense or any other relative agency in government to ensure that we shut it down. Like I told you, the military was part of Indian Point. And when you have a consensus coming out of the Department of Defense saying that this is a dangerous entity located in Westchester County, it gives more spice to it. It shows more credibility. So we need more, we need to make sure we have a coalition on a federal level to ensure that Indian Point is closed down.
Yeah, so the answer is, I think so, except people mean different things when they say the Green New Deal. So here's what I mean when I say it. One, we need a carbon tax, which is why Professor Girard of Columbia Law School endorsed our campaign, because that's the single best way to cut down on the fossil fuel emissions. And we need to make fossil fuel companies pay for the pollution they put out. Two, we need a national service plan where you can serve if you want in the military, but I hope more people serve in the Peace Corps and the new green 21st century infrastructure corps, where when you serve in it, you get 2 free years of education for 2 years served, 4 free years of education for 4 years served. And so that's what most people say when they mean the Green New Deal: infrastructure and real regulations on pollution, and supporting California's attempt to have higher fuel efficiency standards, which the president is rolling back. There's nothing that's more important to me than fighting for the future of our planet, because we could talk about any issue, even critical issues like gun safety, which is a huge issue for me, equality, as we're talking about here. Actually, nothing matters more than protecting that rock that we're spinning around on as it goes through space. So if we can't have a planet we can live on, nothing else matters. So it's a huge priority for me, and that's what I support. And I think that means I support the Green New Deal, but a lot of people seem to have their own versions of that. So that's what I support. Yeah, it's a great question. Do any of you know Nancy Vann from Peekskill?
Yes.
She's been a leader on this, and by the way, environmental justice, again, if we don't have a healthy planet, we have nothing. But that's not to say that the burdens of a unhealthy planet fall equally on everybody. They don't. For example, the burdens on the risk of Indian Point fall unequally on people who live near Indian Point. Traditionally, the burdens of a dirty, irresponsible economy fell unequally on places like Peekskill and people on the Hudson River that were having GE dump stuff in our backyards and in our waterways. And of course, more globally, nationally, it's not usually a coincidence that if you look at where people of color live and you draw maps of where the Superfunds are and all the pollution, they tend to correlate somewhat tightly. And so there's an aspect of racial justice that overlaps with economic justice. I know Nancy Vann's been a real leader on Indian Point, and what I learned when I read the OIG report last year, or early this year, I guess it feels like an eternity since coronavirus, but when I read it a few months ago, it scared the hell out of me. We had gas pipelines right underneath a nuclear plant that our federal government did not even adequately investigate. We just assumed it would be okay. And so that's not acceptable. I mean, forget about just us, all of New York City could have been endangered. And so I will make it a huge priority if, and I hope when I'm in Congress, to have oversight hearings to say, NRC, what's going on here? What are you doing to actually protect us? And how can you listen the next time when we have citizen activists that you're ignoring for years to make sure that the science and the scientists are in control and not just bureaucrats who are in the pocket of the energy industry? So it's a huge issue. We need Congress to oversee it. We also need to do more of what Nita Lowey's already done, which is get resources, as I said, to the communities near Indian Point, which is near Peekskill, to ensure that the economic burden doesn't fall on those school districts unevenly and unfairly, because we're all going to benefit from its decommissioning. So then we all need to chip in and make sure that the kids who go to school, who used to have their school bill basically paid by Indian Point, that they have some other way to fund their education.
Yes, I will. And I supported and co-sponsored the Climate Leadership and Protection Act in the New York State Senate, which is very similar to the Green New Deal on a state level. So I've already voted for that and look forward to joining on as a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal in the House.
Great. And then our second question is, in this upcoming year, as you may know, the Indian Point nuclear power plant will be decommissioned. What efforts would you put forth to ensure that the federal government is assisting New York State and Westchester County in monitoring what could be a pretty precarious
process? Because I'm in the Senate and we have the ability there, we're pushing to have an oversight committee that's made up of representatives of the community and experts from around the state to make sure that we have another watchdog in there, because the decommissioning is one of the most vulnerable times in the plant, and it can be extremely dangerous to all of us. So the other issue there is that we need to hold the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, accountable. And I've actually written a letter to the chairwoman of the NRC asking her to come here and answer our questions, because I have a lot of them, and I'm sure you do, and many of our residents do as well. I'm very, very concerned and frightened about Holtec, which is the company that was hired by the NRC to do the decommissioning. They have a very scary record. They've been debarred from doing practice with other agencies in the federal government, but somehow they're able to be the head of the decommissioning of this very sensitive project. So that is something that we need to make sure they're held accountable to. They've already said that $2 billion fund may not be enough money. That really scares me. And what it's showing us is that we are not prepared as a nation. That we've been sold, I believe, a bill of goods with nuclear energy, that it's this idea that you flip the lights on and it's cheap energy. Well, it's maybe cheap to us right now, but their legacy costs of nuclear power are just so extreme that those spent fuel rods at Indian Point are going to be there long after we're all gone, thousands of years after we're all gone. And there's not a plan to discharge of that and what we're actually doing. So the cost it will just increase. We also have to make sure that with the NRC, that this is a perfect example. With the decommissioning of Indian Point, it'll be disastrous to our economy because of the taxes that they pay. And our school districts will suffer, and the whole county of Westchester and the region, because the county will play a part in that as well. So it's not just the school district right there at Indian Point, it's other school districts around it and other property taxpayers as well. And that has not been included into the formula. And as a member of Congress, I'll be demanding that that funding is there to make sure that communities aren't held hostage. You know, because we know we don't want a nuclear power plant, but we also don't want to starve. And that is not any way to have people living. They shouldn't be living in fear of the immediate economic consequences or the long-term health and sustainability of a community. So that has to change. And right now, I think they really have leverage. You know, it's an example around the nation. They have leverage over these communities that people are scared to death, more scared of their economic well-being than the danger of a nuclear fallout. And that has to change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So next up, we have our Civic Engagement Committee Chair, Keisha Palmer-Cousins, who would like to ask a question. Keisha, I'll unmute you.
Okay. Good evening, Senator Carlucci. How are you?
Great. Thank you.
That's good. So weeks ago, New York State said that it needed at least an additional $60 billion in direct federal funding, along with millions of dollars more from Medicaid and FEMA formula changes in the next coronavirus aid package being crafted in Congress. New York's massive request, which is part of the National Governors Association, as you know, bid for $500 billion for all the states and territories, would be spread over 3 fiscal years, unrestricted, and could be used for revenue shortfalls. So right now, I am concerned, and we are concerned about the amount of monies that the state was actually given, especially, you know, of course, New York State. So especially with this coronavirus that's going on. So what are your feelings about states that were given more monies than New York State? And how is your relationship with the governor, especially since you're going for this position? I know you have a relationship with him now. That would change if you get this position. So I would like to know what guiding, in addition to this question, what guiding principles do you use daily to negotiate for services and for funding for your constituents?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's the issue of our time right now, because we need that funding from the federal government. There's no question about it. The things we talked about today, funding to our schools, the social safety nets, our healthcare system is all in jeopardy because the first round, the CARES Act, it funded for just coronavirus related expenses, not making up exactly what you said with the revenue shortfall, which if you talk to any superintendent, talk to any village mayor or whatever, you know it's disastrous. And the fact that many people in the Senate and the House and our president are saying that they don't want to fund or bail out the blue states, basically, which is absolutely absurd. And so I think that has to get done. And you asked me about negotiating. And I think this is something that I've worked really well on. You know, last year I passed more legislation than any lawmaker in the state of New York. My time in the Senate, I've had to work with Democrats and Republicans out of necessity. That many of the bills in my career over the past 10 years, we needed Republican votes in the Senate if we were going to get anything done. So I had to reach across the aisle and do that. And the way that I've always done that, as I've said, okay, where can we agree? You know, because with the Republicans, many of the issues, I mean, most of the issues, I don't agree with them on. But we can find some common ground, particularly when we try to take the politics away. When we're talking about educating our children, I mean, how can you disagree with that? And where do we go from there? You know, protecting the environment, public safety, those issues. It's where can you find common ground and where can you build from that? Never sacrificing your principles, however, moving forward on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And that's really been my guiding principle, that I've always been one to say, hey, rhetoric, talk, it's cheap. And I ran in the first place to say, I'm going to actually do something. You know, I was one of those people that said, I don't want to just run for office and be all talk and be the politician that everyone the stereotypical politician, that's someone that actually delivers. And that's what I've always been committed to doing, to saying, okay, hey, you know, I might not be able to get everything I want done, but I'm not going to leave here without bringing back for my district the things that need to be addressed. You know, we've had very serious issues in my Senate district just on education alone. You know, you can look at the Ossining School District, where we've been shortchanged foundation aid for a long time. And so last year, we were actually able to get the highest increase in foundation aid in the state. The East Ramapo School District is another district that I represent that is unprecedented. There's no district like it in the state. And I was able to work, at that time, the Republicans had the majority, and we were able to get a deal to have we passed a law that has the Commissioner of Education of the state sign off on the budgets of the East Ramapo School District and provided a fund of $3 million in a locked box to go to non-mandated programs in the public schools for programs like kindergarten, because we didn't have kindergarten. And that just drives me crazy, that I wasn't going to stand there and just, do politics as usual and allow another session to go by while these kids don't have access to kindergarten. Absurd. So we were able to do that. We got a fund that created a full day kindergarten and music and art and extracurricular activities. And that program continues to this day. I just bring those up as examples of where, hey, I had to work with people that I don't see eye to eye on politically, but was able to get a deal done to benefit our community.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you, Keisha Palmer-Cousins. So next, we'd like to circle back very quickly to Nat Lejay Wilson, our youth chair. She has one question that she'd like to ask. So Nat Lejay, would you proceed? I'm going to unmute you. No? Nat Lejay?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me
Yes.
now? Okay, sorry, I have bad service. I just have to switch to the screen. So bear with me, thank you. Okay, all right, so one of the other concerns I have as a youth advocate for young adults between 13 to 25 is getting assistance for mental health care. The increased risk of suicide between ages 15 and 35 is due to their lack of access to direct care. Teachers are overwhelmed in the schools, and mental health education should be as mandatory yearly as CPR. Lack of proper mental health translates into bullying, loneliness, isolation, eating disorders, social distancing, anxiety. How can we standardize mental health in our communities and not just give it, but enforcing it, making it a note to not have it only available, but even more so available to communities of color? That is the question.
Great. No, thank you.
For youth.
This is something I'm very passionate about. I chair the Mental Health Committee in the New York State Senate. That's something our leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, appointed me to. And I've been on the Mental Health Committee my 10 years in the Senate. And to me, this is one of the biggest issues of our time. I know when Elizabeth was asking me the question about with education disparity, I think, we're talking about technology and financial education, that's important. But I think even on top of that is mental health, and that we need the funding to make sure we have mental health professionals in our schools. And also that we could teach our kids how to read and write, but if we don't teach them about their own brain, we're doing them a major disservice. We have approximately 130 Americans that commit suicide every year in the United States. This year, I passed legislation because I worked with Dr. Lindsay out of NYU. He found really disturbing data that showed that Black youth suicide was on the rise. We're talking about children. We're talking about like kids as old as 6 years old that I just couldn't believe. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And it's just, you can't even fathom that. But he showed me the data and he showed me what was going on. And we saw that there's a disparity here. And we've seen suicide rise in every demographic. But it was very startling with Black youth that this was happening. So we were able to pass legislation this year with the help of Dr. Lindsay from the McSilver Institute at NYU to have this legislation of this advisory committee that will be working to work on this issue. In addition to that, Another piece of legislation I passed, it's the Suicide Prevention Act of 2019. And basically what that does is it really meets the issue of the cultural competency, that we know that suicide and mental health is something that, you know, no one really likes to talk about. But even in different cultures, it's even harder to talk about. And how you get that information and how you get suicide prevention practices, we have to meet people where they are. And New York State, you know, we're 19.5 million people, every culture, every language. And, you know, I've seen it in my Senate district where we have very diverse cultures, that you have to penetrate that. And me going there and talking the way I talk about is not going to resonate with people, you know, not resonate with everyone. And so we have to be able to do that. So that's something extremely important. I think we have to fight the stigma of mental illness head on. One of the other things that I was able to pass a couple years ago is the Mental Health Stigma Fund tax checkoff. So basically on your income taxes, and they've been pushed back to July 15th, so you still have an opportunity. When you fill out your income taxes, you could check off on this box on the bottom to make a tax deduction contribution to a fund that fights the mental health stigma. Another important piece that we need to do is I would like to see a 3-digit hotline for mental health and suicide prevention. Right now, we have a 10-digit suicide hotline. It's a national hotline. New York State, we run that hotline. We have professionals that are there to pick up the phones. In fact, in New York, we actually have the lowest suicide rate per capita in the nation. And I think that's for a multitude of reasons. Not to say that we're doing an amazing job, but it is showing that we are doing programs and we are still above many other states in this nation. Why we need a federal response. So we need a 3-digit hotline. And the FCC did a report. They cleared the way for 988. And in fact, right before the coronavirus basically shut everything down, I was down in Washington at the FCC's headquarters talking to their leadership about how we need to implement the 988 program immediately. And I even introduced legislation in New York State to require the Public Service Commission to flip the switch and allow that to be accessed immediately. Because we don't have to recreate the wheel. We already have the professionals on the phones that can answer the phones. But people don't know that number. They don't know they can call it. And by calling 211 or an information hotline, that doesn't work. You got to get people right away. So that's why I introduced that legislation, so that we can just flip the switch and we can allow New York to be up and running. And when I'm in the House, I want to see this nationwide, because whether you grow up in Peekskill or in Pittsburgh or wherever it is, that you know 988 is who you call when you're in crisis, and it helps fight the stigma. That just like we have 911, we have 988, and this is something that you just know, and that you know that this is the number that you call. So there's many issues that we can do, but I think these are just a few of them. And the funding in our schools is critical, that this needs to be a top priority, to have the right amount of counselors, to have the right amount of mental health professionals, and also have a robust curriculum around teaching emotional intelligence and knowing how to deal with that. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we have in society today. I really believe that. And so I really thank you for asking that question, because I think it's overlooked way too often. And it is one of the big problems in society that gets swept under the rug and just has a ripple effect and affects so many other things. If you're not feeling good about yourself, you can't learn. It leads to so many other problems. So, and it's really something that if you get in, and particularly with a young person that's having a problem, and you can address that early, I mean, that makes the world a difference and changes the trajectory of their life.
Okay. Thank you so much for that answer, Senator. Are you okay with time?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have our Vice President, Ramona Massenberg, on the phone, and she's been asking a very important question to the candidates. And so I'd like to offer her the opportunity to ask you the same question. So Ramona, I will unmute you, I think. Ramona, try to unmute yourself. There you go. Okay.
Good evening, Senator. Thank you for being with us. My question is regarding the coronavirus, and we've been getting daily updates from our governor and also from the New York City mayor, and sometime from the president. I was wondering how you would have handled the situation if you were, in that spot.
Oh, well, I mean, so I'm not going to do the 2020 hindsight because, of course, I could have said, "Oh, I knew this was coming," and no. I mean, but I think we got to give the governor credit for just keeping us informed, and I find that's one of the most important things. What I've been doing is sending out regular emails, doing Facebook town halls, and just trying to communicate as much as possible. I think one of the learning lessons here is the Defense Production Act, which basically we've heard about the governor push the president on and has been, I think, really mishandled on that because, look, for the future, we don't know if we'll need, thousands of ventilators or whatever it is that we need. And that's hard to predict. But what we need to do is when the next emergency strikes, that we as a nation come together and use all of our resources in a real focused approach. And that has been missing. And that's something that I think is easily fixable for the future. That, stockpiling tons of stuff, I think about that and I'm like, a technology like a ventilator, that's not going to remain good. And that probably is not an answer. But we need to be nimble and we need to be ready to be able to, whether it's produce a vaccine, produce a ventilator, or something as simple as a gown or a mask. It's shown that with all of our ability and all of our power and our might of the United States of America, we couldn't come together and mass produce PPE. I mean, let alone, the ventilator, okay, but I mean, something as simple as a mask shows how far behind we are. And I think that is one of the many lessons that we've learned. So I think, if I were in that position as president or as governor, that obviously in hindsight now we know how far behind we are on that. But something that I've also been very concerned about for years is our pharmaceutical industry and the vaccines. I was part of the push last year to mandate that we repeal basically the religious exemption for not getting vaccinated. I think it's extremely important that every child that's medically eligible gets vaccinated. But with that said, so in Rockland County, we have Pfizer, which is one of the largest private employers. And they used to develop Prevnar, which is one of the world's most used vaccines. They basically, stopped producing that vaccine here and it got shipped overseas. And what I learned was that the European Union requires that if you're going to sell and distribute vaccines in the European Union, you have to produce them there. And I find that that's a real problem for us. And I think it's exposed to us what we kind of already knew, that, hey, we're allowing China and these other countries to really control our destiny. And we, I think, have really dodged, a bullet here in terms of how bad it really could have been. That if these countries really decided to screw us, they really held all the leverage. And I think that's really a wake-up call for us, that we have to be ready for the next emergency, that we can coordinate our manpower and our productivity to mass produce the products that we need. But I think it also shows us that we have to keep an inventory and know what is produced in this country and what is not. And I think we're going to see the ramifications of that for months and maybe even years to come. I've been hearing stories about certain products you're just not going to be able to get a hold of because they're produced in one part of China, and that's just one part of a component of many that you're just not going to see these products. So I think it's taught us that lesson. And that's something that as a member of Congress, I'm going to be pushing to make sure we're ready to respond in the future.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that answer. I have unmuted everybody. I thought. Nevertheless, we thank you so much, Senator, for coming on this call and answering our questions. We will be broadcasting this interview with my amateur editing skills, and that will
No.
and that will come out by June 15th. We wanted to get everything out before the primaries. Nevertheless, once again, we thank you. We thank all of our chairs and our co-chairs that participated in this call. And we wish you a safe and happy summer coming up and Memorial Day weekend. And good luck.
Yeah, thank you for your time and thank you for the great questions and your advocacy, and look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.